Happy New Year, Jets fans. I'm Glenn Norton with JetNation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log on to JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. So I went live the other day with Chris Schubert. We were a little short on time, so there was a key thing I wanted to get to but didn't have the opportunity. So I thought, why not New Year's Day, New Year's morning in the States? I know we'll probably have, let's say, some very limited interaction. I imagine a fair number of people are still in bed or are awake and not 100% with it after a nice night out. Hope you all had a great time. I know I did. Um, Couple of things with this Jets team and current players, former players, looking at some of the history that kind of leads me to I guess see some reason for optimism, being fully aware of the fact that it'll probably lead to nothing because that's what optimism with this team usually does. But just being, just trying to be fair to the team, fair to the situation. Um, I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and I told them, I said, "Oh, this is actually a topic we're going to hit on the show tonight." And it ended up not panning out because we were short on time. But the Bill Parcells saying, right? You are what your record says you are, and I get the sentiment. I get what Parcells means by that, and many others who have repeated it since then. But really, if you look at it just from a talent perspective, and you look like a good example right now, I'll give you one good example today and one good example historically, that involves Bill Parcells. So the good example right now is all these rumors out of New England that Bill Belichick might be moving on. The team might be, no one knows what's really going to happen, but you're seeing these stories, these articles. Where could Belichick land next? Where would he go next? And with any head coaching hire, anytime there's an opening, really, you don't even have to specify Belichick. Anytime there are job openings around the NFL, and you have the top candidate, if there's a hot candidate who's getting a lot of calls and for interviews, what do we always talk about? We talk about the situation. We say like, hey, look, this coach, he would love to go to San Diego where they already have Herbert in place and they've got a franchise quarterback. So that's, the biggest thing on the to-do list is already taken care of. And then maybe you look a little deeper, you look beyond that, but there are do they have cap space? Are they going to have a high pick? You look at the big picture. For some reason, when we're analyzing where a coach should want to go, would want to go, desirable locations for a coach to get a new job, we always look at the big picture and we look at what is already in place for that coach to work with. But when it comes to just looking at the team that you root for, people just go, "You are what your record says you are," and there's no need for any further discussion. Well, in terms of the standings, yes, but in terms of, especially for a team like the Jets right now, in terms of what you have to look forward to next season, when the Jets start next season, they're 0-0, and what they'll have, ideally, if things play out as planned, which again rarely ever does, but the Jets will be a team with Aaron Rodgers. The Jets will be a team with elite corners. The Jets will be a team with high-end defensive line depth. The Jets will be a team with, a pair of explosive running backs. I think we'll see a fair bit of Izzy in Week 17. Um, they'll be a team with a dynamic receiver in Garrett Wilson and whatever pieces they add. So it's not as if the cupboard is bare and this team is what they were 4 or 5 years ago when you start the season and you start the offseason and you need, I don't know, 47 new quality players. This team is a lot further along than that. And I think back, it's funny that it's a Parcells saying, right? You are what your record says you are. But then if you look at Parcells, after he won a Super Bowl with the Giants and he became sort of a household name, a guy that teams, he was an in-demand coach when openings came up and he was available. I don't think it's by mistake that he came to the Jets. And if you look at that Jets team, Happy New Year, Joe. Glad to see you here. If you look at that Parcells team that he took over for Rich Kotite, you could say, well, that's a 1-15 Jets team. Yet they were a 1-15 Jets team because the coaching staff was completely clueless. You had the worst coach in Jets history in Rich Kotite. And within a year or two, you go from 1-15 to you're 500, then you got a winning record, then you're in the AFC Championship game. And it's not as if the Jets brought in a boatload of new players. A lot of that core was still in place. A lot of those guys that were on the Kotite team were on the Parcells team that went from 1 win to whatever it was, 7 or 8 wins to that, maybe 9, did they maybe jump to 9 and 7, whatever it was. So you go from 1 win to 7, 8, 9 wins the following year with minimal talent being imported. You were still built around guys like Mo Lewis, Marvin Jones, Aaron Glenn, Victor Green, Ray Mickens. Of course, yeah, you added Keyshawn Johnson, but Keyshawn was there the 1 in 15 year. So he's another guy. So there were very talented players in play. You don't think Bill Parcells looked at that Jets roster, and especially having to play them a couple times a year with the Patriots, you don't think he looked across and, it helped, of course, Parcells was a Jersey guy, would have given him the chance to come home. But you don't think he looked across the field when he played the Jets or watched that team on film and said, they got some good players. Like, I could win with these guys. Like, we might need a couple more pieces, but I could win with that team. So when the Jets come calling, of course he's going to listen. Yeah, I'd like to be near home, and I'd like to. And then, you know, we saw what happened. AFC Championship game that they lose with ridiculous. Happy New Year to you too, Wild Wave. Thanks for checking us out. Like I said, not the most ideal time. Let's see. Arizona loss and Jets loss means Washington win gets them pick 2. Yeah, I think or lost them pick 2. Yeah, I don't know. I looked it basically I looked at the scores this morning, and it looked like every single team the Jets needed to lose or needed to win ended up losing. So the Jets are still at 8 or 9 or wherever it is. But being what your record says you are, again, yes, from a standings perspective, of course, that's the case. But if you look at a team, if you look at the totality of a roster, this Jets team isn't that far. As I said the other day, this was a top 10 team, and people say to me, "Oh, so what? That's Vegas odds." The reason I use Vegas odds, Vegas doesn't care about how you feel about the team or emotion, like stuff like that is removed. They're looking at what you've put together. Who's on your team? What's your like there's other factors, but they don't care about anyone's emotions or feelings about a team when they're trying to say, who do we believe has the best odds to win the Super Bowl? So the Jets, as we said, were a top 10 Vegas pick to go to the Super Bowl or to win the Super Bowl prior to all the injuries. So when people say to me that this team is what their record says they are, yeah, I get it, but I also see what's in place to be built around. And what the Jets have to do, in all reality, is start. And this is where it comes back to coaching. Look at some of the players the Jets have let go in recent years. And again, how much of this? Here's the thing: with the way the Jets are playing right now, you have some of the fan base is mad at ownership. Some of the fan base is mad at Robert Saleh. Some of the fan base is mad at Joe Douglas. And everyone has decided on their own who they want to blame. And once they pick who they want to blame, they don't want to come off of that and say, oh, maybe I was wrong about that. But when I look at the Parcells situation and him coming to the Jets and how much better they were a year later, and I look at this Jets roster and I look at some of the players who have left, I can't help but wonder, would they be better right now as a team with better coaching? And would some of the players they let go be gone if the coaching had been better? And I sent out a tweet about this a little while ago, and many of the replies are people who are completely missing the point. Um, People saying, well, those players sucked anyway. You probably wanted them gone anyway. These aren't good players. Stop saying da da da. Missing the point. I sent out a tweet naming some players. I'll give you the players. Elijah Moore in Cleveland, Michael Carter in Arizona, Morgan Moses in Baltimore, George Fant in Houston, Greg Van Roten with the Raiders. Every single one of these guys, and there are others, but these are the ones that stand out most, especially with the O-line stuff. Every one of these guys is playing at a much higher level than they did when they played with the Jets. What changed? Schemes change, coaches change. You're in different situations. You're being taught, every coach has their own method. But we've seen so many players leave this team. Right now, Morgan Moses, Fant, and Van Roten would be the 3 best linemen on this Jets team. As crazy as that sounds. And you can, with Fant, I said during the offseason, I was like, he's a guy, maybe you bring him back. Maybe bring him back. Um, KD, Glenn, been listening since 2016. Much appreciated, KD. Um, they are, but my point that I'm making, I think a lot of this, and this isn't a great revelation, but again, it's depending on who you're talking to, because some people refuse to believe it's Salah. They want to say it's Joe Douglas. But as the GM, your job is to go get these players. And granted, you could say Joe Douglas should have retained them, but this is the part where none of us really knows what's going on in these meeting rooms. Like, are they talking about these free agents? And is Robert Sala and his coaching staff or his offensive coaches, whether it's Hackett or whether it was LaFleur or whoever, are they saying to Joe Douglas, "Look, man, you brought Fanton, and we have no use for him. He's not good enough." And I know Fan had some injury issues, but let's face it. Even if I think bringing him back as a backup would have made a lot of sense. With him being fully cleared medically, I think they should have brought him back as a instead of almost any other lineman they brought in. Morgan Moses, you can make the case. He was getting older. Maybe they thought he was going to have a decline. That didn't come. And again, Van Roten. Van Roten is not a great player. I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh my God, how in the world do you let go of Greg Van Roten?" That's not what I'm saying, and that's how some people are interpreting the tweet. What I'm saying is, why is he better when he left? Why is Michael Carter better when he left? Why is Fant better when he left? Why is Elijah Moore better when he left? And not a little bit better. Elijah Moore right now has more than twice the yards the Jets' second receiver has. Alan Lazard's got 311 yards, and Moore's got like 640, 650, something like that. Might even be 630. Whatever it is, he's got more than twice as many yards as the next guy. And the Moore thing, listen, I'm not going to rewrite history in terms of what my opinion might take. I said at the time, very talented player, has the ability to go on and be a great one, but I got why the Jets let him go. You couldn't have a guy when you were trying to build a culture of positivity who was demanding a trade in the middle of a winning streak because to him it was all about him. It's like if we're losing and I'm getting the ball, that's okay. If we're winning and I'm not, it's not okay. You can't have that in the locker room. So I get it. Frankie D, Joe Flacco. Listen, how much better is Flacco? Well, we talked about this the other day also. I think with the Flacco situation, one, again, much better line. Um, he's a veteran guy who's now playing for something. I mean, when he was on the Jets, they stunk the whole time. He didn't have the time to throw that he's getting in Cleveland. And maybe having as much time off as he just had for a guy his age, maybe that, getting that break physically to heal, but mentally thinking, "Oh my God, have I taken my last snap? Is there a chance I'll never play another game in the NFL?" And then boom, you sign with the best defense in the NFL, and all of a sudden you think, "I feel good. The defense is lights out. I got a chance at a ring." Like, I can't imagine how rejuvenated he is. I wanted him gone last year. I mean, my goodness. He looked semi-retired on the field last year. That nap that they caught him taking on the bench the other day, he was taking those naps in the huddle when he was with the Jets. And I kind of don't blame him. He's in his late 30s. All he's doing is dropping back, getting his head kicked in, and not winning any football games. So, these guys are human beings at the end of the day. Yeah, again, scheme, as I mentioned, just depends on where they are. Rewatch Becton versus the Eagles. He was outstanding. Michael makes this point that Becton, and I said it the other day, right now, Mekhi Becton is playing the worst football of his career. I understand Mekhi Becton has detractors who are probably celebrating right now over how bad he's playing, but you need to explain to me why now, at this point, he is by far playing the worst football we've ever seen him play when he's a couple of games away from free agency. Because people said in the offseason, "Oh, the only reason Mekhi Becton lost the weight and he's finally willing to put the work in, he's so greedy. He just wants a big contract." Okay, I'll play along. Then why is he playing this way right now? He sure as hell ain't getting a big contract, giving up 2, 3 sacks every week. So it's one or the other. Is he greedy and wants a big contract? Okay, then why is he? But then he quits with a month to go in the season. I don't think Mekhi Becton has quit. I think he's either hurt or fatigued. That's why he's playing the worst football of his life. But that's another reason why I think, listen, there was a report the other day. I forget who said it. What was it? I forget the insider said the Jets are going to fire Keith Carter, offensive line coach. this offseason. I'm hearing, listen, maybe you're hearing, maybe you're not. I I'm a dopey blogger, and I've been saying for weeks, and I've said on other people's shows, like, Carter's gotta be the guy to go. Someone has to go, the way the team has played this year, and as you watch other teams and their backup offensive linemen, granted, they may not be on their 15th or 14th lineman like the Jets have been, but they're dealing with some injuries, and guys are stepping in and playing at an acceptable level. With the Jets, that's just not happening at all. Let's see, so would I make changes to Joe Douglas? Who was giving the advice, like restructuring Uzama, Tomlinson? Listen, those were wild wave, but I really think all of that was done to make the Rodgers deal happen and to ensure maximum cap flexibility for the next year or two to allow Rodgers to come in to fit his deal under, um, and to add free agents. And that's the other part about this season. Who in the world knows if we can say, oh, the offensive line was been terrible this year, which it has. Joe Douglas didn't do anything at the deadline. Maybe Joe Douglas looked at the roster and knew, like, look, we're mathematically in this, but this isn't going to last. And I'm not going to give up a second round pick, a third round pick for a band aid lineman. Granted, you could have gotten other guys. We've discussed the Ezra Cleveland situation. Um, but I don't know why you would expect Joe Douglas would have done the same thing had the Jets been competitive. Like if Rodgers hadn't gotten hurt and they were, playing at a level that was legit, that would legitimately give them a chance at the playoffs, maybe it's a completely different story at the trade deadline. And Joe Douglas is looking at it and saying, look, we've got a little bit of cap room to work with. We need this and this. Let's go get those pieces so we can make this playoff run. But maybe he looked at the roster and just accepted the fact that we're not good enough to go to the playoffs. So I'm not going to throw away assets at this point. And that's why we didn't see a lot of moves or any moves at the deadline. So Joe Douglas obviously is the guy bringing in this talent that we're talking about. And again, unless this is what I started to say a few minutes ago, unless you're in those meetings, like I don't know, is Joe Douglas sitting there saying, "Look, we like Morgan Moses," and are they saying, "Look, he's too old and slow, doesn't fit our scheme." All right, well, why don't we want Fant? We don't want Fant because of this reason. Why don't we want Van Roten? We don't want him because of this reason. Why should we let go of Michael Carter? Well, we should let go of Michael Carter for these reasons. Okay, and then everywhere they land, they're playing at a higher level than anybody else on this team right now, but at least for the offensive linemen. That's concerning to me if I'm Joe Douglas. You gotta look at your coaches and say, "Look, I we brought these guys in, they played terrible football for us, and now they've moved on and they're playing fine elsewhere. And everybody we have is not well, not everybody, but a lot of the guys we have that we're rotating in and out, they're not playing well. So, as much as people wanna pretend they know the answers and, you know, fire this guy, it's Douglas's fault, it's Salah's fault, it's Woody's fault. We don't know who's weighing in with what when they're discussing, because a good GM head coach combo, they get on the same page. The GM says, "What do you need? What do you want? What do you want me to get you to fill in this position to get us to this spot?" And he takes the feedback from his coaches and he goes from there. And he brought in a lot of these guys who played terrible football. Or Moses was solid though. Let's be fair. I think with him it may have been an age thing. Um, But it's just a weird thing to me to hear people act as if they know exactly who's to blame for each thing. Whereas, I mean, everyone has a different role. Joe Douglas brings the players in, the coaches develop them and play them, ownership signs the checks. But is ownership doing more than signing the checks? This is a very interesting story. And this was funny enough, I don't know why, but this hasn't made the press at all. At least and when I say that, I mean the Jets beat hasn't covered this at all. So listen to this story if you haven't heard it yet. And even if you had, listen. Um, Albert Breer, who is in my mind, he's up there with Schefter and Rappaport. He doesn't get as many scoops. He's not like the 24/7 firing off inside stories. But when Breer gets a story, Breer gets it right. And he gets some nuggets that not everybody gets. And someone posted this on the forums on JetNation.com. I should have pulled it up just to give the person credit. And this is, when I tell you guys you should be in the forums on JetNation.com, had I not been in there, I wouldn't have seen this thread that was started. And I thought, okay, let me go. find this interview. Let's see what, see, Albert Breer, Untouchable Crew is the person who posted this. So he made this post. I went and looked it up, found it on YouTube. It is in fact out there. Albert Breer, 9, 10, I don't know, somewhere around 2 weeks ago, was doing a sit down with Colin Cowherd. What are you hearing about this? What are you hearing about that? Going sort of around the league with, and then Cowherd, with about 2 3 minutes left in the interview, Cowherd says, what's going on in New York? Everything's falling apart. Robert Saleh, his staff, blah blah blah. And then Breer just kind of voluntarily says, a couple of years ago, Joe Douglas wanted to take an offensive lineman and ownership stepped in. That's a big story. Why why are the Jets why isn't the Jets beat all over this? So Albert Breer is saying, and if for those of you who are unaware, Woody Johnson, it was widely reported before drafting Zach Wilson that the Johnson family had a good relationship with Zach Wilson's uncle, who owns JetBlue Airlines, who I almost booked a flight with the other day, by the way. Um, so Woody Johnson is friendly with Zach Wilson's uncle a couple of years ago when he's coming out in the draft. And Albert Breer says a couple of years ago, Joe Douglas wanted to go O-line and ownership stepped in. Well, if you look back to that Zach Wilson year, and I remember thinking, even though the Jets needed a quarterback, I remember at that time they had just taken Becton, and that was when everybody loved Becton. Remember that? I remember when everybody loved Mekhi Becton and everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing, but then he gets hurt, so then he's the worst guy in the world. But I remember thinking, man, you take Penei Sewell and you put him opposite Mekhi Becton, you're set at tackle for how many years? And I remember thinking, Joe Douglas, offensive line guy, he may do just that. He might say, I'm taking bookend tackles back-to-back years. And Penei Sewell's on the board, and the Jets take Zach Wilson. And again, according to Albert Breer, that was ownership stepping in and overruling Joe Douglas. So here we are complaining Joe Douglas can't build an O-line. Well, maybe in a parallel universe, Mekhi Becton stays healthy and Joe Douglas takes Sewell. And those are your two tackles for the next 10 years, and you're set there. So that big enough story, big enough blurb from Breer, that it was really surprising to not hear anything from the Jets beat on that. I thought that would have been all over. It was not. The thread, Jet Nation, let me take a look real quick. It's got to be 14, 15 pages long. I forget exactly how it's basically it's generating a lot of conversation among Jets fans. And if that is in fact why the Jets didn't take a tackle there and went with Zach Wilson because ownership called for it, then we're all here getting mad at Joe Douglas for not doing a better job with the O line, and he's not 100% making the calls. And again, on the one hand, we get mad at ownership, but what I say to fans all the time, I'm like, man, be honest with yourself. If you own this football team, you would be meddling away. You wouldn't just be sitting back like, oh, I'm just going to sit in the back of the room here, not interject. You'd be making every pick. You'd name yourself the GM. Be honest. 2 years in a row, Becton came to camp overweight and out of shape. I know the year after the injury, and that was very disappointing. He was out of shape this year. By the time camp rolled around, he looked fine. And I'm trying to remember the previous year, he came in starting right tackle, got hurt right away. So, I mean, look, no one's denying Becton had weight issues, and he had a hard time with keeping the weight off, which is clearly a discipline issue. Take it from another fat guy. So I don't know why. I mean, that's not a surprise. We know that it's not a good thing, but sometimes young players have to learn, and they have to get their act together. And Becton appeared to do that this offseason. And Wild Wave says it was said that Woody forced the LaFleur firing. I don't doubt that because I think it was pretty clear. LaFleur was Salah's guy. LaFleur was best man at Salah's wedding or whatever it was. They're that close. And then somebody had to be let go, and it looked like it was LaFleur. I have no doubt that Woody And especially now, if we're looking at this from a maybe a lot of here's the unfortunate thing for Joe Douglas, if you're the New York Jets. Well, not if you're the New York, if you're Joe Douglas. So Albert Breer is reporting that Joe Douglas was overruled. Pardon me. So it's being reported by Albert Breer that Joe Douglas was overruled by ownership when he wanted to take a lineman, presumably Penei Sewell, and the Jets had to take Zach Wilson because of Zach Wilson's uncle's relationship with Woody Johnson. And then we see this offseason, even though Zach gets demoted, they don't replace Zach on the depth chart. They keep him at number 2. So now you wonder, is that also because of Woody Johnson's relationship with Zach Wilson's uncle? And if so, you're Joe Douglas, you're the Jets GM, you're not getting to pick the guys you want in the draft, and then you're going out and getting Aaron Rodgers, and you have to trade or you have to give up resources and roster spots to 5 different players who aren't very good because of their relationship with Aaron Rodgers. You're really kind of again, without being in that room, I don't know how you say definitively that Joe Douglas isn't doing a great job because of the fact that he didn't build the O-line and having to add these Rodgers players to keep him happy. It sounds as if he's kind of a little bit handcuffed. And in that case, does Joe Douglas say, well, then I'd rather not be here. Maybe Joe Douglas is looking forward to his contract expiring and getting some interviews elsewhere. I hope not. I still like Joe D. I don't, and when I say I like him, I'm not saying I think he's perfect. I think the Madden generation kind of thinks every draft pick has to be a hit, or if you draft a player and he's not a star, then he's not a hit. Like I can recall people, I remember people who loved Eric Mangini being in love with, a lot of his sort of mid late round guys who were only around for a couple of years. But it was like, no, that's a hit. If you get a 7th round pick and he's on your roster for 3 years and he contributes a little bit, that's a hit. I mean, if by that standard, there are guys, you can look at a guy like Bryce Hall, like Ashton Davis, some of these late rounders. Well, not that Davis was a late rounder, but there are some guys on the roster who aren't superstars, but they are contributors. And I wonder if we might see Ashton Davis back. I wonder if we might see Bryce Hall back. We'll have to wait and see. Joe says trade pick 2, don't draft Zach. Don't trade for AR. I was right on all 3. Woody's the problem. Well, and again, this is the thing, Joe. Who is calling the major shots at One Jets Drive? Who's calling the shots on draft day? You would imagine it's Joe Douglas, but again, according to Breer, Woody stepping in, and and now I'm trying to think, was that Chris? I might be messing that up. Trying to think, was he in London? I think Woody may have still been in London. But again, I mean, do we really believe that there's not phone call? Like again, asking if you own the Jets and you got a job elsewhere where the league said you're not allowed to be involved in the day-to-day operations, are you not making some phone calls and saying, look, here's what I want to happen. One of my best friend's nephew is coming out of BYU, highly thought of kid. We're taking him. Again, I'm not saying it did happen. I'm just saying, well, I mean, Albert Breer saying it happened. Although I believe he said he didn't name Wilson specifically. He said a couple of years ago, when Douglas wanted to take an O lineman. So you have to believe if you're going to overrule a GM anywhere, you're going to overrule him at quarterback. And it sounds like that's what happened. So Douglas gets overruled there. He brings in Aaron Rodgers. They're a top 10 pick for to be a Super Bowl winner, but he's having to bring in all these guys to keep Rodgers happy. Meanwhile, everyone, well, not everyone, that's silly, not everyone, but a lot of guys who they've allowed to walk have played better elsewhere. So Joe Douglas has brought in some talented players, but the results have not been there. To me, that's a coaching thing. Obviously, I know this staff is back. Everybody's back. Well, the head coach is back. I don't think Carter is back, and nor should he be. But what do you do there? I don't know if Bill Callahan still has any years left on his deal in Cleveland, but I'd pay that dude as much as I'm paying Robert Saleh, if not more, to bring him in to fix this mess. Very big mess indeed. Who made it? Who's is it Woody? Is it Joe D? Is it Robert Saleh? They all have their hand in it to some degree. My best guess would be Woody's overruling, on some of these picks. But Joe Douglas is, as I said, identify and acquire talent. and he's doing that, and that talent isn't playing to its potential. Injuries have certainly not helped. It's time for this team to take a look at the training staff and see if there need to be changes made there because those guys, I mean, their offensive line has been a mash unit 2 years in a row. Can't have that. Can't have that again next year. Some changes have to be made. But as far as the Jets being as good as being what your record says you are, I don't see them as a team that's going to be the worst team in the NFL next year or a top 5 pick. Again, if guys stay healthy, stay on the damn field, and hopefully less meddling from ownership. I'm Glenn Naughton. Enjoy your new year, folks. Have a good one.